December 16th, 1944. Private First Class John Collins of the 106th Infantry Division was eating breakfast when the artillery started. He had been in Europe less than a week. His division had been sent to the Ardennes sector because it was quiet. Everyone said the Germans were finished. Many of the men had been writing letters home about being safe for Christmas, hot meals, maybe some rest before the final push into Germany. This was supposed to be the easy posting. The shelling was unlike anything the training manuals described. It wasn't sporadic. It wasn't aimed fire. It was a rolling barrage that turned the Belgian forest into an inferno of exploding trees and frozen earth. Within 30 minutes, German infantry would be in their positions. Within hours, his entire regiment would be surrounded. On December 19th, 4 days after the attack began, over 6,000 men from the 106th Infantry Division would surrender in the largest mass capitulation of American forces in the European theater. Collins didn't know any of this yet. He just knew the Germans weren't supposed to be here. This was the quiet sector, the place where green divisions learned the basics before rotating to real combat zones. Someone had miscalculated badly. The Ardennes sector in December 1944 was considered the safest posting in Europe. The terrain was terrible for armored warfare. Dense forests, narrow roads, steep hills. The Germans would never attack here. General Omar Bradley, commanding the 12th Army Group, had assigned General Troy Middleton's 8th Corps to hold 80 miles of the Ardennes front. That was nearly triple the width doctrine recommended for a corps in defensive positions. His reasoning was simple. The Ardennes was quiet, so you could hold it with fewer troops. Those freed-up divisions could support operations elsewhere. Patton's Third Army advancing toward the Saar, the Ninth Army pushing toward the Roer dams, offensive operations that would end the war faster. It was a calculated risk. Bradley believed the Germans lacked the strength for major counteroffensives. Allied intelligence agreed. The Wehrmacht was finished. Everyone knew it. The First Army's commander, Lieutenant General Courtney Hodges, accepted the defensive assignment without protest. His army would hold the Ghost Front. Other armies would win the war. What nobody calculated was what happens when you're wrong. Bradley had a problem in fall 1944. He commanded 3 armies, but didn't have enough supplies for all of them to operate simultaneously. The logistics network couldn't keep up with the rapid advance through France. Fuel was limited. More critically, artillery ammunition was being rationed. Every 155mm shell allocated to defensive positions was one less shell for offensive operations. Every gallon of gasoline given to one army meant another army didn't move. Bradley made a choice. Patton's Third Army got priority. They were advancing toward Germany and killing Germans efficiently. The offensive had momentum. Montgomery's operations in the north also required support. Bradley resented giving the British anything, but Eisenhower insisted on maintaining alliance cooperation. That left First Army as the economy option. Hodges would hold the Ardennes with minimal resources while Patton and Montgomery conducted offensive operations. Bradley imposed a supply ceiling. First Army would receive enough to survive, not enough to prepare for serious combat. On paper, it made sense. Why waste supplies defending a static front when you could use them to attack elsewhere? Bradley was thinking like an offensive-minded commander, maximizing combat power. What he wasn't thinking about was what happens when the quiet sector explodes. By December 1944, First Army's 8th Corps was holding 80 miles with 4 divisions. Do the math. Each division was responsible for roughly 15 to 20 miles of front. Doctrine called for 5 miles maximum for stable defensive positions. 2 of those divisions were brand new to combat. The 99th Infantry had arrived in November. The 106th Infantry had arrived in early December. Untested troops with no combat experience, holding frontline positions. First Army had no strategic reserves. Every available unit was in the line. If the Germans attacked, There was nothing behind the front to stop a breakthrough. Supply dumps were minimal. Ammunition stockpiles were kept low because offensive operations elsewhere had priority. Fuel reserves barely existed. The assumption was that defensive operations don't consume resources like offensives do. In Bradley's heated headquarters in Luxembourg, the Ardennes was an acceptable risk. In a frozen foxhole in the Schnee Eifel with frozen boots and a half-empty canteen, there was no such thing as acceptable. Hodges requested reinforcements. He warned that his front was dangerously thin. Bradley told him the Ardennes was quiet and to make do with what he had. The soldiers in those frozen foxholes didn't know their lives had been used as a line item in a strategic gamble. Allied intelligence detected German troop movements in early December. Rail traffic increased behind the German lines opposite the Ardennes. Intercepted communications suggested something was building. First Army intelligence officers reported unusual activity. Civilians in Luxembourg reported seeing German patrols that shouldn't be there. Captured prisoners mentioned rumors of a major offensive. The reports went up the chain to Bradley's headquarters and were dismissed. Germany lacked resources for major offensives. Bradley's staff wanted to believe the war was nearly over. Nobody wanted to divert resources based on unlikely threats. On December 15th, one day before the attack, First Army intelligence issued a warning. Enemy preparations suggest possible attack in Ardennes sector within 24 to 48 hours. Recommend increased alertness and reserve positioning. Bradley's headquarters acknowledged the report. No action was taken. The Ardennes remained the quiet sector with untested divisions and no reserves. The intelligence officers were right. Nobody listened. At 5:30 a.m. on December 16, 1944, 1,600 German artillery pieces opened fire simultaneously across 80 miles of front. It was one of the largest German artillery barrages of the war. American soldiers in foxholes had no warning. The forest exploded. Trees shattered. The frozen ground erupted. Men who had never experienced combat were thrown into hell without preparation. 29 German divisions attacked. Over 200,000 troops supported by 1,000 tanks. They hit the exact places where First Army was weakest. The seams between divisions. The positions held by green troops. The sectors with no reserves behind them. The 106th Infantry Division took the main blow. 2 regiments were surrounded within hours. They fought desperately, but they were inexperienced soldiers facing veteran SS panzer troops. There was nowhere to retreat and no reserves coming to help. The 99th Infantry Division held Elsenborn Ridge against impossible odds. They were new to combat, but they had good defensive positions. They would prove that American soldiers could fight brilliantly, even in catastrophic situations. But across 80 miles, the line was breaking. Bradley's quiet sector had just become the largest battle the U.S. Army would fight in World War II. The 106th Infantry Division fought for 3 days surrounded in the Schnee Eifel. They had ammunition for maybe 48 hours of sustained combat. They had no way to evacuate wounded. No supply drops could reach them. Radio batteries were dying. The sound of German tanks grew closer each hour. Relief remained a distant promise that never arrived. The division commander requested permission to break out. His troops could fight their way west while they still had ammunition and mobility. Bradley's headquarters told him to hold his position. Relief was coming. The 7th Armored Division attempted to reach them but was choked off in the narrow streets of Saint-Vith. The strategic reserves that should have existed were committed too far south or too far north. The 106th was abandoned. On December 19th, after 3 days of encirclement, 2 regiments of the 106th Infantry Division surrendered. Over 6,000 American soldiers became prisoners of war. It was the largest mass surrender of American forces in the European theater. These weren't cowards. They fought until their ammunition ran out. They held positions against overwhelming force. They did everything soldiers could do in an impossible situation, created by command decisions that left them defenseless. The boys, who had been in combat positions less than a week, paid the price for Bradley's logistics gamble. While the 106th collapsed, the 99th Infantry Division was stopping the German advance at Elsenborn Ridge. They were just as fresh, just as new to combat. But they had terrain, and they had leadership that refused to break. German 6th Panzer Army threw everything at Elsenborn. SS Panzer Divisions, elite infantry, concentrated artillery. The ridge was the key to the northern shoulder of the German advance. Take it, and the whole American line would unravel. The 99th held. For 6 days, they absorbed attacks that should have broken experienced troops. They called artillery on their own positions when Germans got too close. They fought hand to hand when ammunition ran low. Bradley's gamble didn't fail because of American soldiers. It succeeded despite his decisions because the boys he called green fought like lions. This proved American soldiers could stop anything when properly supported. Both Elsenborn and Schnee-Eifel were consequences of Bradley spreading First Army too thin. Some units got lucky with terrain, others got surrounded and destroyed. Bradley didn't grasp the scale of the German offensive for almost 24 hours. Initial reports suggested local attacks, probing actions, nothing that threatened the overall front. By December 17th, the truth was undeniable. This wasn't a local attack. This was a major offensive with strategic objectives. The Germans were driving for the Meuse River and possibly Antwerp. Bradley's entire command structure was threatened. The German penetration had split First Army in the north from Third Army in the south. Communications were disrupted. The front was collapsing. Eisenhower called an emergency meeting at Verdun on December 19th. He asked Bradley how this had happened. How had German forces assembled 29 divisions without Allied intelligence detecting it? How had First Army been so vulnerable? Bradley had no good answers. The Ghost Front wasn't quiet anymore. It was the crisis that would define the final months of the war. At the Verdun meeting, Eisenhower asked his commanders how quickly they could respond. Most said they needed days or weeks to reorganize forces and prepare counterattacks. Patton said he could attack in 48 hours. He had anticipated the possibility and prepared contingency plans. Give him the order, and Third Army would drive north into the German flank. On December 22nd, 3 divisions of Third Army attacked the southern edge of the German Bulge. They had moved over 100 miles in winter weather and launched coordinated assaults with minimal preparation time. This proved American forces could move and fight brilliantly when properly resourced. Third Army had the fuel and ammunition Bradley allocated to offensive operations. First Army had been left with barely enough to survive. The contrast was stark, and the consequences were devastating. Now Patton was using those resources to rescue the army Bradley had left defenseless. The Battle of the Bulge lasted 6 weeks. By the time American forces eliminated the German salient in late January 1945, the casualties were staggering. Nearly 80,000 American casualties, 19,000 killed, over 23,000 captured. The rest wounded. It was the bloodiest single battle the U.S. Army fought in World War II. The 106th Infantry Division was effectively destroyed. The division that had been in combat positions less than a week suffered over 8,600 casualties. Most were prisoners of war who wouldn't come home until May 1945. First Army divisions that held the initial assault suffered catastrophic losses. Rifle companies that started December 16th with 200 men finished the battle with 40. A rifle company is more than a unit. It's a neighborhood. The boys who shared cigarettes on December 15th were mostly memories by the 20th. The silence in the barracks after the battle was the sound of empty chairs at tables that would never be full again. These were preventable casualties. The soldiers paid in blood for command decisions made in comfortable headquarters. The math that started the disaster was simple. Doctrine was ignored. Reserves were withheld. Warnings were silenced. Bradley didn't just miscalculate. He chose to ignore the fundamental rules of defense. First Army needed strategic reserves. The 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions were being held in Rons as SHAEF reserves. Two elite divisions, positioned in depth behind the front, would have stopped the German breakthrough cold. Bradley didn't request their release until the evening of December 17th, over 36 hours after the attack began. By then, the German penetration was already catastrophic. Bradley made a choice. He prioritized offensive momentum over defensive security. He gambled that the Ardennes would stay quiet while his armies attacked elsewhere. When you're right, you're a genius. When you're wrong, soldiers die. The human cost of that 36-hour delay was catastrophic. History has been kind to Bradley. He argued the gamble was worth the cost because the war ended sooner. But that's a comfort only the living can afford. Intelligence estimates suggested Germany lacked resources for major offensives. The assessment was wrong, but it was based on available information. Nobody predicted Hitler would gamble everything on one desperate attack. The Ardennes gamble ultimately worked. Germany was defeated. The war ended in May 1945. But could better defensive preparation have prevented nearly 80,000 American casualties? The soldiers who died in the snow never got to vote on whether the gamble was worth it.